Agatha All Along, Episode 7. Some amazing storytelling finally brought to light, and the tragic loss of another great character. All that and more after this. All right, guys, Brent here back with you. Variants cover all things Marvel, DC, Lord of the Rings, anime, gaming, Star Wars, and more. This time, Marvel's Agatha All Along, Episode 7, Death's Hand and Mine. And I gotta say, this is probably one of the better episodes of the series overall. While there really hasn't been a definitive episode where you can go, yeah, this is bad, this one's writing really stood out the most about the series because we learned significant thing about our one true divination witch, Lilia, and we covered a lot of her backstory in this episode, which I'm very, very happy to see. I thought ultimately she was going to get her shine, but hey, I'm happy when I'm wrong. And with everything involving Lily, we see that her divination powers have been putting her life kind of in a blender since she was very, very little. We went back to her time in Sicily, and if you're not familiar with Sicily, it's a little island off the boot of Italy. And she was basically talking with her mother, who has been long since gone, but she's fully aware as a child when her mom is going. That is the ultimate downside of having the gift of divination. You can see the end, not just for yourself, but for the ones you love. And there's very little in ways of interpreting how to stop this from happening. And she's talking with her mother basically about how her user gifts, what's going on with her life, how she's kind of been hopping in and out of time spaces throughout her life. She said basically when I was young, I'd be really present for a while and then I'll be gone. And then as we had this large gap into where we are now with Agatha, she started having these time skips and time jumps again where she's not mentally there, but physically she is there, if that actually makes any lick of sense. Physically, she's in person with you, but basically, her from either the past or the future is speaking through her body as a conduit to everyone around her. Hence, she's able to give all these sage pieces of advice to members of either her coven or people that she's looking out for. And in this episode, she really kind of learned to embrace who she was and what she is, in fact, about. She's been running from death her whole life. She's been avoiding that penultimate moment as long as she can possibly see things. And then ultimately, as this episode goes along, we ultimately end up in a tarot game where Disney is once again just kind of milking its own product because we had Agatha appear as the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz, and we had Wiccan appear as Maleficent. So we had, a couple callbacks there to stuff that they had going on. And again, Halloween's right around the corner. Can't really blame them too much as far as cosplaying as themselves. And ultimately, they're going through a game of tarot, and they're going through things in the wrong form, in the wrong manner. Ultimately, they had the wrong person as the main questioner on whose life they needed to discuss. And the ceiling above us is not only rotating downward, trying to squish us, it also is dropping swords at us. Isn't that amazing? It makes you feel very safe and very comfortable to have to do a high level task of divination, such as this, through a tarot reading, while you're having swords dropping on you. Terrible form of practice. Don't try it at home. Ultimately, they were basically able to, through the help of Lilia and our potions, which who had another interaction with the Seven, who continued to make appearances throughout this episode as we're going on in their quest for Agatha, were able to stumble their way through the tunnel that was apparently directly under the road. So you don't die if you get thrown in the road. You just get dropped off lower underground. You can follow a tunnel, and then you can pop up at either another place in time, or you can take the metro train that was shown and basically get yourself out of there, get yourself out of Dodge. Ultimately, they go back to assist Wiccan and Agatha with the events that are going on. And throughout the time that they're helping out, Lilia is having flashbacks and flash forward. She's going back to when she was a kid back in the island. She's going back to her time reading for Wiccan in the tent when they first initially met, and for her other times throughout where she was going through all these episodes. The writing really stands out because all these moments where we thought Lily was just out here being crazy and losing her dang mind, she was just having moments of complete lucid transparency with her divination, and she was yelling about moments that were actually happening in this episode but having it transpire during events of prior episodes, which I think is fantastic writing. It's good storytelling. It's like when you see things from multiple different perspectives, such as like a movie like Knives Out or Vantage Point, where you see the same thing, series of events happening, but from the angle you're seeing it, it's entirely different. So you have a whole new perspective on what's going on, which I think is good storytelling overall. I'm a sucker for those kind of things. So, hook, line, and sinker for this. But again, everything involving this episode, Lilia starts reading for Wiccan, thinking that he's the one who's important and what's kind of going on here. She mentions power, and ultimately, Agatha is staring down Wiccan like she is greedy as all get out. And ultimately, there's going to be a moment in time where those two will have some kind of conversation or fight involving what ultimately is going to happen, because I know she sees Wiccan as that new protege, or at least someone whose power she can just suck directly out of him so she can regain hers. Agatha is still in this for her, and the fact she's leaning more into her villainous side per episode is kind of leading us to believe that ultimately she will not be a hero by the time we reach the end of this series. Or will she? Because there's another theory going on involving that, where she will redeem herself by giving up her quest for power in order to have a quote unquote son, which could in fact be Wiccan, because we know that she traded her original son, Nicholas Scratch, for the Darkhold in a deal with Rio, the original Green Witch, also known as Death, which was officially confirmed in this episode. Lilia then eventually figures out that, hey, I'm the person who I need to be doing the reading for. She goes through all of her series of events, ultimately beats the tarot game, quote unquote, and is able to ascertain what she needs to do and stops everyone from ultimately getting impaled by swords and having them go on out of this trial safe and sound. As Agatha is going out of the trial, Lilia stops her and says, hey, when she calls you a coward, duck. So look for that happening in the next 2 episodes, as that's going to be definite foreshadowing of what's to transpire. Ultimately, the 7 then invade the area where Lilia is at, and Lilia decides to pull one of the most gangster moments we've seen in Marvel. Not only is she accepting of her death, but she's basically taunting the 7, saying, hey, I'm going to go ahead and end all of you right here, right now. And she does a tower inverted, which the tower was originally inverted, which was upside down. So now it's right side up. The whole building flips. And because the building flips and we had a ceiling full of swords, now the floor is swords, and you're falling down because the way gravity works, and you're impaling all 7 members of that coven. But eventually, Lilia decides, hey, I'm going to let go and embrace my fate, which she stated throughout this episode that her death that she foresaw was through falling. She falls, impaled by sword, end of episode. So this whole episode was about Lilia and her embracing herself in her future and in her life of what's going on. We see her at the very end of the episode basically being able to relive her life with her mother and family and her coven. So it looks like she's going to have a happy ending potentially after all, or just going to be a whole vicious time loop where things continue on in that series of events, ending with the fact that Rio is now hot on the trail of everybody as Death, and is likely going to try and claim more bodies that she believes was promised to her by Agatha. Going to be very interesting to see how the series finishes. Remember, there's 2 episodes next week, so be sure to hit that lovely red subscribe button so you can find out what times those drop pertaining to us, and we'll have both those episodes covered for you guys, the viewer. I'm Brent for Geek Variants. I'll see you guys in the next one.